Good morning, I'm Javier Martinez. I'm the Managing Director of National Policy for Abriendo Puertas, and I want to welcome you to this webinar on the California state budget and its impact on our families. As many of you know, we are in the midst of a $30+ billion budget deficit in the state of California, one that will have tremendous impact on the well-being of our families and the well-being of our communities. And so this is part of a process for us to become more engaged, for us to understand better, and for us to learn from each other about how these budget decisions are made and how we as Californianos can help influence that process. Bueno,
we're going to get started with the first part of this webinar. We have Yulisa Gomez, who is the VP of a group called Street Level Strategies, who are experts on different policy at state and national level. And today they're here to give us a webinar about the California budget and the process by which that budget is drafted year after year. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce my colleague, Julissa Gomez. Julissa, welcome.
Julissa Gomez. Julissa, bienvenida. Welcome.
Hola, buenos días. Thank you so much, Javier, for that warm introduction. I really appreciate it. Buenos días a todos.
Good morning, everyone. And my presentation will be in English because it's a little bit technical. I hope that you can follow the presentation, and we have interpretation available. Please make sure to select your channel.
So thank you so much, Javier, for that warm introduction as mentioned. And I'm going to be doing the presentation in English, and hopefully everybody can follow along since there is interpretation. But if there's anything, please feel free to flag it, and I'm sure one of my colleagues will help along. And if there's any questions along the way, just let us know too, so that we'll be taking those, I know, at the end, but nonetheless, both you can write them in English and Spanish. So
if there's any questions, you can write it either on English or Spanish, and we'll be answering at the end.
Bueno, ya empezaremos. Bueno, entonces, we'll get started. This is going to be just a quick overview of what the California budget process is, the revenue streams for education, and the expenditures on the education side as well. It's going to be a quick overview, but I hopefully will provide some details and context of how people can get involved in order to advocate along the way for the necessary budgetary items that you deem important for your groups. So you will hopefully understand what is important and how to go about advocating when it's necessary and the impact that then it makes on schools, okay? Next slide. Okay, so this is basically this is the state budget process. The state budget process is a little bit unique in the sense that the governor has a role, and so does the state legislature. The state legislature is made up of two different houses, the lower and the upper house. So our lower are the assembly members. There's 80 assembly members across California, and there's 40 senators across California. And both of them, both of those houses work together in order to provide a budget. And basically what happened many years ago, the state legislature was notorious for being late on the budget, and they would turn it in many different times. And now there's very strict rules about the budget, and they must pass a balanced budget by June 15th. And then in July is when the next fiscal year starts. So that is very, you know, I want to say within the last 10-15 years that has been happening. Before then, as I mentioned, the state legislature was a little bit notorious for passing a very late budget. However, the governor is very integral in the process of creating the budget. So in the beginning of the year, the budget is released by the governor. The governor releases a very detailed plan about what are his or her priorities. In this case, it's Governor Newsom, his priorities for the next fiscal year. So starting from July to the next July, right? And then the Senate and the Assembly begin to review those. And there are committees. There's many, many committees in both of those houses. And basically there's a subcommittee group that meets, and they begin to review the budgetary process. The subcommittee then begins crafting their own version of that based on the budget put together by the governor. So they will review each and every line item in that budget and say, yes, no, this should be more, this should be less, we should actually bring in a whole new set of budgetary line items, etc. Then in, which is around the corner, the May 14th is the budget revise. And this is like a big deal. This is when the governor proposes the revised budget after looking at many different revenue streams, expenditure streams, meeting with groups as well, and revises the budget, what he or she feels that is important. Now, at the budgetary subcommittee meetings is also an important role that all parents and advocates can take part in. They can go ahead and like advocate for what they feel is appropriate in those line items. So this is really important because you can set up meeting, you can go to subcommittee meetings. Those are a little bit harder to get into now because of COVID restrictions. They've kind of changed a lot of that. But my recommendation is to go ahead and call your assembly member, call your senator, and set up a meeting in district. You don't even have to go to Sacramento. They're in your district, you know, most of the time coming in on Wednesday or Thursday through the weekend. And then they're definitely taking meetings. They're also at events. Talk to them about what your concerns are and what you feel is important and needs to be included in this budget. After the governor then proposes that May 14th, then again, the Senate and Assembly budgetary subcommittees continue to meet, and then they revise and start to work on a final version. And between May and June, which is just a month, the governor and the legislature come together and they approve a budget. And this is really critical. And this month is when all of the meetings are happening. This is when all of those deals are being made in regard of like, hey, let's put this much money towards this effort and let's take out this. Let's add more money here. Let's take away. So all of that is being happening within that month. And so it's really critical at this juncture that parents and advocates and other people meet with their state legislature to really advocate and really express what they think is important and come to the meeting with important facts, right? So if you are a parent of a special education, for example, special needs child, and this is a really important programming for you, advocate for that. Tell them why it's important. Tell them your story of what it's like to be a parent. They want to hear from you. You know, they have the facts and figures, but they need to have those personal stories of why it's important and how it affects you, one of their constituents, and how it affects families like you in the neighborhood, in the community. So be sure to tell those stories. You don't have to come with facts and figures. As I mentioned, it's just telling your story and how these programs affect you. Okay. And then once that happens, and June 15th, the state legislature, both the Senate and the Assembly, passed the budget. Then it goes to the governor, and the governor signs the budget. And then that's it. We have a state budget. And then in July 1st, it begins. And then we'll do this process all over again next year. And that's kind of really the entire process. Okay, next slide. No. Okay, the governor, as I mentioned, his role, he proposes a state legislature. This is Governor Newsom. He's a Democratic governor. He proposes every year a budget, and in this budget, he puts his priorities. So he comes up with his projections as well on what is going to be received, how much money the state has to spend. So those are his projected revenues, and then how much he intends to spend for the upcoming year. And this is really critical. This is really important because this is when we find out how property taxes, all the revenue streams that we get money from, sales, income taxes, etc., and how the state as a whole is doing. And so this is really important as well, because you get to figure out, is there going to be are we going to be over budget? Or are we going to be under budget, right? Based on the expenditures from last year, are we going to need more money or are we going to need less money? And so the governor looks at all these things and then he proposed, well, that's when it happens in in January. And that's when you get to figure out, okay, the state is spending more money than it's receiving due to a lot of factors, people moving out, income taxes, et cetera. So it's really important in January, we kind of figure out where we are as a state. Next slide. Okay, so we're going to talk about specifically about educational funding. This is really, I think, an area that is a little bit complicated. It is a complicated area in terms of how it gets funded. It's not just from one area, right? The majority of K through 12 funding comes from local property taxes. So in your local community, all those people who own homes and other properties, whether commercial properties, they all pay taxes on that. And then local property, a portion of that then goes to funding at the local level, right? So that it happens all across the state. That's how schools are funded from K through 12, right? It's the local property taxes, then that money goes into the K through 12 school districts, right? There is some money though that come from the state through income and sales taxes. And the state provides that additional funding on top of the income taxes. So think of it like a sandwich, right? So then your main which are the cold cut meats, right, in your sandwich, right? If you eat meat, you eat meat, that's your protein, right? That's all the local property taxes. And on top of that is the state funding. That's all the sides, right? That's like the lettuce, the tomato, etc. And then way at the top, like your condiments, right? Your mayonnaise. If you're like me, you like a little bit of chile in there, right? You put a little bit of tapatio, right? That's going to be the federal funding. That's even smaller, right? The federal government provides a little bit of money to provide governments through like Title I, but it's very small. Okay, hopefully you that sandwich analogy helped a little bit. And so the majority of the funding, as mentioned, comes from property taxes. Okay, next slide. Higher education is a little bit different. This is funding for colleges, right? So like community colleges, the UC system, the Cal State system. So it was those three main buckets of college for higher education, right? And the state provides funding of that through its annual budget. So they apportion a line item and says this much is going for UCs, this much is going for the state schools, and this much is going for the community college. I should mention state schools are the CSUs. So I refer to them as state schools, but those are the three buckets that is included in each of the line items. Now, school students' tuition and the fees that they pay also contribute to that school, right? And so it goes back to the instructional costs. So if you're paying a tuition, that's what that is, right? That's for the UCs and the CSUs and community colleges as well, all three of them, right? Some of them vary in different levels, right? You pay a little bit more. I think the most expensive are the UC, sorry, and then the state schools are a little bit less expensive, and the community college is less expensive, but they're still paying a tuition cost that is paying for the instructional costs, right? And then there's federal funds. Again, the federal government does provide some money to students that then to offset the cost that they have to pay, right? So if you have to pay, I don't know, let's say you're paying your tuition at the UC schools, and then you receive a grant, that money is from the federal government that then goes to the school. The student never receives the money, it goes straight to the school, and then they get less money to pay, okay? And then there's private donations and endowments that people as individuals who are very wealthy then will make those donations to the schools to offset, again, some of those costs to operate the community colleges or the UCs or the state schools. Okay, so that's kind of how they receive funding. Next slide. Okay, Early childhood education. This is a little bit, again, uses a diverse mix of funds, right? There's just not one. And it's a little bit complicated as well, but nonetheless, you do see that there is places there to advocate for early education childhood resources, right? So local funding, basically local school districts also provide funding for early education programs such as preschool and TK. And this is really important too, because this is also, the local school governments provide that line item, right? As they're going through their own budgeting process as well. And so that's really another place too that you could be advocating at the school board meetings with your school board members as well. So there's different places for you to be advocating, not just with the assembly and the state. It's also equally important to be advocating for that. And then the state also is funded. The state also provides funding for local education, for early education childhood services, right? So they provide a small sliver of that, and even smaller comes from the federal government. Right now, the budget for childcare programs is about $8 billion, and 1.5 is from the California Works or CalWorks, right? And it's basically going towards the efforts of childcare services, right? And that's about 1.5 billion. 3.9 is for non-CalWorks childcare programs, right? And then 2.6 is for the support of all programs. So that's all childhood programs, right? And so think of it of early preschool, or think of it as TK falls under this. Even earlier than that, some preschool start at 2 years old. That goes in there as well. So all of that funding starts from the CalWorks program and from the non-CalWorks program, as you see in that budget, and then other supported programs. So it's a little bit complicated, but that's basically it. So right now there's about $8 billion going towards early childhood education funding. Okay. Next slide. Thank you. And so what can we do to advocate? I think I talked about a lot of it as I was presenting today. One of them is attend school board meetings. This is really important for all of you, right? Who's your school board member? You should have one. They should all be apportioned to the people where you live. This is really important. Contact them, meet with them, attend the school board meetings. They also go through their own budgeting process that is sometimes involves parents, sometimes involves the teachers. It looks different at each school board level. And sometimes they do participatory meetings so that parents can come and meet and they can advocate and say what they think is important for their students and for their children, right? Contact school board members outside of the board meetings, meet with them, set up a meeting, tell them what your story is. Again, share with them your story. You don't have to come with facts and figures. Tell them how your child needs dual education, for example. For example, my daughter is a dual language immersion program, and most recently it was going to be cut. And so we met, or it was going to be in a split classroom. So she was going to be in a kindergarten and first grade classroom, and not just with the kindergarten classroom. And, I called the school board, my school board member, and I told them, that I didn't think that this was appropriate. And I said, why? My child would have fallen even further behind. Socially, she's not at the first grade level. And it was really important that she stay just with the kindergarteners and not have that split. So we talked a lot about that, or from a first grade perspective, right? And so I gave all those examples. I didn't come with facts and figures. I just told them why my daughter would not benefit from some programs like that. And I told them that other kids would be in a very similar experience, right? So advocate for those programs. Tell them your own experience with these programs. And then, as I mentioned, call your local representatives, right? Call your local assembly member. There's 80. Call your local Senate, and there's 40 of them, right? Depending on where you live. As I mentioned too, they're in district. You don't have to go to Sacramento. They're here. They're in the community. They're having events. They're hosting different things. So be sure to just advocate and go and talk to them. Tell them your story. And then the other thing is, during when you attend the school board meetings is to speak at public comment, right? So for example, at each meeting, they designate at the beginning or at the end, a section where they say public comment. And then that section is for anybody that wants to talk about anything that they want to talk about. Here's an opportunity for you to advocate for your budget priorities. So talk about that early education program that your child is in. Is it a TK program? Is it a preschool program? Is the preschool program like looking, it might disappear from your particular school site because it's no longer, there is no funding for it. Or you wanted them to start a new one in your school, right? That's important because most kids have to travel across the district to another school, all the way over there to attend a preschool site that's, 15 to 20 miles. And then you have your other child attending this K through 12 school. So advocate, see if they can add some a preschool classroom in your school. Advocate for that. Tell them your priorities. And then organize other parents around that. Build coalitions, tell the teachers, ask them, hey, would this be helpful? I talk to my teacher, my daughter's teacher all the time. I ask her, hey, would this be helpful if I went and said this to the school district? Would it be helpful if I said this to my school board member? And show a united front. This is really important that everybody's on the same page, right? If you do that, the powers in numbers. If they're receiving phone calls and meeting requests from parents like you who are going to share similar stories, then they're going to be advocating to say that they need that, then they're going to listen and they're going to hear from parents and say, okay, maybe we do need to add more money to this, or maybe we don't add more money to this so we can keep these programs funded. It's important that you all tell your stories and making sure that you advocate for what is important in your community. And that's about it. Javier, I don't know if you want, how you want to facilitate questions and answers.
Thank you so much, Julissa. Muchas gracias por esa presentación. Vamos más tiempo.
We're gonna leave the questions for the end. If you can please stay with us.
Sí, un poquito más tiempo. Bueno, sí, bueno, gracias.
Thank you, Julissa, for your presentation, for your very
informativa.
All that information, and thank you for providing us like a starting point to be able to understand this process, which is very complicated, especially in a state that is so big as California. I believe it's the 7th economy in the world. So we're talking about basically a country. So we're gonna continue to our next presenter. She is a mom for the Academic Caminos. And she's here with us to tell us a little bit about this process and how this process can impact her family and her community. Yarisa, welcome.
Yeah, dame un momentito.
Give me a second.
Claro, no hay problema.
Welcome.
Bienvenida.
Thank you.
Sí,
good morning, everyone. My name is Yarisa Flores. I'm a mom of 3 kids. They are in 2 different schools. One of them is in high school, and my other 2 kids are in middle school, and the other one in elementary. The 2 boys are autistic, and they've been through a lot of IEP processes, therapy, and a lot of other resources. So I feel like right now, with all the budget cuts that we're seeing, this will affect us, not only my kids, but all kids with different learning abilities, with different needs, because there's not just autistic kids that have an IEP. There's all different kids with different
necesidades de los
needs that
niños.
require these
Y
services.
de por sí es
As
un poco difícil
it
que
is already
provean los
difficult to
servicios
get
a veces,
services.
tardan
The
un poco
process is
por todo el
complicated. You
proceso,
don't
si
get
lo
services
aprueban, cuántos
immediately.
minutos y
It
todo
has to be
eso.
approved. There's a
Y con un
limit on the
recorte
time that they
de
get
ese
services.
tamaño, yo siento
And with a
que
budget
todos los
cut
niños, no
of that
solamente con los
size that is
niños
being
que
is
están con
prospected,
alguna
I think that all
necesidad, un
kids
IP,
with
un
IAPs or
504,
504,
o así van a
uh,
necesitar, sino también
and
los niños que
also
están adentro de la escuela. El
kids
personal se
in the schools and
recortaría.
also staff will be
Yo
cut.
siento
So
que
I
de por sí
feel like
ahorita
we
ya
already
tenemos como
have
un
a
déficit
deficit
en
in
la educación de
education
los
for our
niños
kids,
y
and
con un
with a
recorte sería
budget cut
como algo
of
más
that size
masivo
will be massive, and
y
it
nos
will affect
afectaría a
all of
todos,
us,
a los
our
niños,
kids,
a los
our
papás,
parents.
por las
Therapies will
terapias,
be limited,
por
and
el
also
personal
the staff
de
that's available,
cuidado, por los
teachers.
maestros que están escaseando
There's not
bastante
enough
los
teachers right
maestros.
now. So
Entonces no sé
I
cómo,
don't know
no sé cómo nos
how
vendría un cambio así. Nos afectaría
a
mucho,
change
eso sí
like
lo sé.
this, what repercussions it will have.
Más
I
que
know that
todo
it will affect us a lot,
porque los niños pues van
because
creciendo y
our
necesitan
kids,
diferentes
their needs
materiales,
change
los maestros
and they need
también.
different
Muchos maestros,
materials,
yo tengo
different
entendido que en
therapies.
algunas escuelas
I
ellos mismos
understand
tienen que
that
sacar de
sometimes
sus
some
budgets para poder
teachers
proveer
had to
a
buy
sus
their own
alumnos.
materials
Y
to
si les
provide materials for
recortan
their own
las horas,
students.
les
And
recortan
if
todo eso, pues
their
no,
hours are
no va a
cut or
poder ser
their
posible.
salary is cut, then all of this is not going to
Entonces,
be
yo creo
possible.
que
So I don't
no
think this
sería
is a
buena
good
idea y
idea. I think
tendríamos que unirnos todos
uh,
y ver qué se puede hacer en
we
un
all need
caso
to
así,
get
porque
together and to
no
see
sería
what we can
conveniente
do,
para
because this
nadie,
is not good
ni para
for
los
anyone,
niños, ni
for
para los
kids, for parents,
papás,
for teachers,
porque creo
because
también van a recortar los servicios,
believe
podrían
that they
recortar los
also
servicios de después de
could
escuela.
cut
Hay muchos
services
papás
after
trabajan todo
school
el día y necesitan
programs.
ese
Some of our
servicio para
parents work
poder
all
tener a sus
day and
niños
they
ahí.
need these
Con
programs
un recorte
for their
así no
kids to
creo que
stay
pueda
in
ser
school while
posible
they work.
que mantengan esos
I don't think that
programas
they'll be
también.
able to pay for those services if they are
Este,
removed.
y pues yo
So I
creo
think
que
that
eso
that's
sería lo más
what's the most
importante. Los
important.
recortes vendrían a
Again,
dañarnos
budget
a
cuts in
todos, a la
education will
comunidad, a
affect us
los
all,
niños, más que
everyone,
todo a los
especially
niños. La
kids.
importancia es de
That's the
los
most
niños
important, because they
porque no
will
habrían
have
los
the
recursos
resources
necesarios en
that
las
they
escuelas
need
para poder
to
brindarles a ellos
provide
lo que de
what
verdad
for their
necesitan.
needs.
Así es, gracias, gracias
Thank you,
Yarisa por
Yarisa. We
ese
appreciate
testimonio.
your
¿Y cuántos
testimony.
hijos
How
dijo
many
que tenía?
kids is it that you have?
Tengo
I have
3
three
ya fuera
in
de,
school.
en la escuela todavía. Una de
En
ellas
escuela
I
está en la
have
todavía.
one
universidad y
of them
también a
that's
ella me
in
afectaría
college, and she
muchísimo
will also get
porque están
affected
subiendo las
because the
mensualidades y a veces
her
pues
fees
no nos
are
puede con el
going up, and
gasto
sometimes you're
porque ya en la
unable
universidad
to
son
to
miles
pay
de
for it.
dólares los que hay que
It's
pagar
thousands
para
of
poder
dollars to
tener
be
a tu
able to
hijo adentro
stay
de una
in the
universidad.
university,
Aunque sí
even
está
though they
FAFSA y
have
todo eso
financial
que
aid
les
that it
ayuda
helps them a
muchísimo,
lot.
pero si
But
están
with
recortes así,
budget
nos van
cuts
a
of
cobrar más.
the
¿Y de
size that
dónde
we're
lo
seeing,
sacaríamos?
it's going to affect us.
Sí, no, eso sí, sí es
Yes,
una
that
posibilidad
is a
que
possibility. It's
es bastante
something that
difícil
is sometimes
de
difficult to
entender en
understand,
realidad, ¿no? Especialmente
especially
aquellos
for you
usted
that
que tiene
have
a
three
tres
kids
hijos
in
a
different
diferentes niveles de
educational
educación
levels and in
o a
different
diferentes niveles educativos más bien, pues es bastante difícil. Vamos gracias
schools. So
Yarisa por
thank you
sus
for your
Muchas
comments,
gracias.
comentarios.
Yarisa. Don't leave.
Pero no se vaya porque
Maybe there will
Chantel
be a
y una
question for
pregunta
you.
para usted, ¿eh?
We're gonna
Vamos a pasar
continue
con la
with our next
siguiente
colleague.
compañera. Ella es
She
la
is
directora
the associate
ejecutiva
executive
asociada
director
de un grupo
with a group that
que colabora
collaborates
con
with
Abriendo
Abriendo
Puertas.
Puertas,
Es el
Central
Central
City
City
Neighborhood
Neighborhood Partners en Los
Partners in
Ángeles.
LA.
Y es la,
And we have two
bueno, tenemos a
colleagues.
dos compañeras. Una de ellas
One
es
of them is the
la
associate
directora
director,
asociada, que es
Diana
Diana
Alfaro.
Alfaro. Y
And
luego también
also
la
we have a
acompaña una navegadora
navigator,
del grupo,
Wendy Chavez.
Wendy
So
Chávez.
welcome
Bienvenidas
to
a
a
este taller
webinar
del
about the
presupuesto de
California State budget.
California.
Wendy and
Wendy y
Diana,
Diana,
welcome.
bienvenidas.
Hola, buenos días a todos.
Hi,
Gracias por
good
tenernos
morning,
aquí.
everyone, and thank you to
Gracias por
introduce
introducirme. Me voy a introducir otra vez. Soy Diana Alfaro, soy la
Diana
directora
Alfaro
asociada
and
ejecutiva aquí de Central
the
City Neighborhood
executive
Partners.
director
Tal vez
of
unos de
this
ustedes lo
group,
conocen, es corto, se llama
CCMP in
CCMP. Voy a dejar
short,
que mi
and I'm gonna
colega
allow
aquí
my
que se
colleague
introduzca y
Wendy
después
to
voy a compartir
introduce
un poquito
herself,
más
and then I'm
sobre
gonna share
qué
about
es
what
CCMP,
CMP, what
nuestros
are services,
servicios y
and
cómo
how
estos
these
recortes
budget
los van a
cuts will be
impactar a
affecting
nosotros y
us.
Wendy
And
va a
Wendy will
compartir un
be
poquito
sharing
sobre
about some
los testimonios
testimonies
que
that we
hemos
have
oído
received
sobre ella dando
while
las
she
clases de Abriendo
teaches
Puertas. Ya hemos dado
Abriendo
4
Puertas
diferentes clases de Abriendo
classes,
Puertas y un poquito en cómo los están
and we
impactando
want
a
to
las
share
familias que
how this is
nosotros
going to
estamos
be impacting the
sirviendo. So,
families that we're
voy a dejar
serving.
que Wendy se
So I'm going to
introduzca y
allow Wendy
después
to introduce herself.
voy otra vez.
Hi, good
Hola,
morning.
buenos
Thank you,
días.
everyone.
Gracias a todos y gracias por la
I'm Wendy
invitación. Mi nombre es
Chavez.
Wendy
I'm one
Chávez.
of
Soy
the
una de las
navigators
navegadoras aquí
here
de
in TCMP.
DCP y les voy a dar más.
Okay, so un
So a
poquito de
little bit of
CCMP, pues nosotros
CCMP,
somos
we are a
un non-profit o una
non-profit.
organización bajo lucros.
We
Estamos
are a
aquí sobre
Westlake
Westlake
Pico
Pico Union,
Union,
so
so
nosotros
we
servimos las
serve
comunidades de
a
Westlake,
Westlake
Pico
Pico Union and
Koreatown.
Koreatown,
Hemos
and
estado
we've been here for
aquí
more
por
than
más de
20
20
years,
años
and
y pues todo
everything
lo que
that we
nosotros
do is
ofrecemos son
free
servicios gratis.
services.
So, los
The
servicios
services
que
that we
nosotros
offer,
ofrecemos
it's
son
access to
acceso a la
food,
comida, acceso a,
a case management,
case management, que es como
also
trabajando con
working
familias
with
en casos
families in
y los
their
casos
cases,
intensivos para ayudarles con si tienen ciertas
helping them
metas o
achieve
si se
some
quieren
goals, or if they
ayudar
need
en algo
need
como algo
something
en personal y
personally.
también
And also
nosotros
we
hacemos
do
muchas cosas
other
diferentes.
different
Tenemos
services.
un
We
programa de
have a
Vita que es
program
que hacemos los
of
impuestos gratis.
Vita,
También
and we also
ayudamos con
have
financial
financial
coaching y
career
career coaching.
coaching.
So
So
es
different services
diferentes
that we
servicios que
offer
nosotros
here
ofrecemos
in
aquí en CCMP y otra vez es
CNP, and again,
completamente
it's
gratis
completely
y
free.
todos estos
And
servicios
all of
son
the services are
ofrecidos
free
gratis
because
porque
we
nosotros
use
usamos muchos de los
many of the
grants que
grants
vienen del
that
estado,
are available
de
through
la
the
ciudad.
state and the
So, cuando
city.
nosotros estamos
So
viendo
what
que
we're
van
seeing
a haber
is that there's
muchos
going to be a lot of cuts in
como
these
cortes en
programs,
estos programas,
and it will affect
los
not only
afectan no solamente
us
a nosotros
as
como
service
los
providers,
service
but
providers,
also
pero también a
to our
nuestras familias, que
families,
nosotros ya
because we
sabemos que
know
tienen
that they
mucha
have a lot of
dificultad ya pagando
difficulties
la
already
renta,
paying rent
sus
and
biles, la
bills,
comida, después
and
viendo que tal vez
now
ni va a haber
knowing that maybe there's not going
suficientes
to be
fondos
enough
para poder
funding
ofrecer más fondos para las personas que
to
califican por
qualify for
CalWORKs o para
CalWorks.
que nosotros estamos
Uh,
entendiendo que no van a haber más
we're also
inversiones
hearing that
en affordable
there might be
housing.
not enough
Muchas de
investment
nuestras
on
familias ya
affordable
se
housing,
van
and a lot of our
um,
families are already
o ya no pueden
struggling to
poder
pay
pagar estas
rent, the high rent
high rent
prices
prices que
that we
tenemos
have
aquí
here in
en
this
CCMP. So
in
nosotros
our
todas
attachment
estas
area.
cosas
So all
los
of this
impacta como una
impact us as an
organización
organization
porque nosotros
because we
queremos
want
lo
the
mejor
best
para
for our
nuestras
families,
familias y también estamos
and
siempre
we
buscando los diferentes
to
servicios
be able to provide all the
que nos
services that will
benefician como
benefit
nosotros
all
como
of
la
us.
comunidad. Una de
One
las
of the
preguntas
questions
que nos
that
dijeron que
we were
si
asked
nosotros como una organización tuviéramos estos fondos,
uh,
¿cómo los
we're
impactará?
asked to answer is
Algo que
how
quiero
would this
compartir de TC
cuts
es
will
el
impact
impacto
us.
es viendo en
So
cómo
the impact
nuestras
is how
familias
our
van a
families will
seguir
continue to
buscando
look
ayuda
for
o seguir
resources and
buscando
support
como support
service here
services
at
aquí con
CCMP.
CCMP y
And
desafortunadamente
unfortunately,
nosotros no vamos a poder
we're not going to be
apoyarlos
able
en nuestros
to put them
programas
on those
estatales o
services,
de la ciudad si ya
state
no hay
or city, if
suficientes
there's not enough
fondos para
funding
eso.
for those
Muchas de nuestras
programs.
familias
Many of our
como ya
families,
había
like I
dicho,
have
tienen
mentioned already, they
dificultades
have already
pagando
have difficulties
ciertos
for paying
necesidades
for
básicos.
basic
Por
needs.
eso a veces
That's
ni
why
pueden tener sus
sometimes they
niños en
can't even
child
put their
care o
kids on
child watch
childcare or
porque
child
les
watch
beneficia
because
más quedarse en
they can't
casa o
afford it.
quedarse
They have to stay at
cuidando a
home,
los niños y eso es
taking
algo
care of
que
their
nosotros
kids.
hemos visto que el pre-K o
And
child watch
we
es
know
algo
that
bueno para los niños porque
TK
pueden avanzar
and childcare is something that's good
crecimiento
for
y
kids
sus
because it's
aprendizajes.
good for their child
So eso
development
es un
too.
poquito de
So this is a
CCMP,
little bit
nosotros
about
los impactamos.
TCMP, and
Obviamente
I'm gonna
Wendy
let
va a hablar
Wendy
un poquito
talk
sobre
about
cómo
how would it
impactaría
impact our
más
families
a nuestras familias y las historias que
and the
ella
stories that she has
escuchado.
heard.
Gracias,
Thank you,
Diana.
Diana. And
Wendy,
Wendy, go
adelante.
ahead.
Bienvenida otra vez.
Yeah.
Sí, gracias.
Yes, thank you.
Estamos pues abriendo
So,
puertas, ¿verdad?
Abriendo Puertas
Nos ha ayudado bastante. Las
has
familias han
helped
visto cómo les va a
them a
impactar
lot.
si no
And
tenemos
families
como
are
cuidado de
seeing how
niños
this will
o
impact if we don't have
early child
childcare
head
or
start o
early
cualquier de esos
Head
programas,
Start
porque eso sí le van a
or
ayudar a
any of those
impactar y
programs, because
prepararlos en la
this
escuela, porque
would
ese es nuestro
help the
enfoque de
kids, because
Abriendo
that's our
Puertas, es
focus on Abriendo
ayudarles a uno
Puertas.
mejorar
how we can help them and help them at home so that our kids are ready for school. And these cuts will impact our parents because now parents will have to do double or triple the job because they're going to have to do it at home. Even though Abriendo Puertas teaches that they can also do this at home, but if they don't have the support of the schools or the support of the teachers, then it's going to be more difficult for parents because many of them have small children. So it's more difficult to help them all. And also it will affect us because, as Teresa said, if there are cuts on after school activities, that will also will affect us. Or schools will cut or some of these programs, then a lot of the kids will not be able to have access to the resources as they don't have the money to pay for those services outside of the school. So this will affect everyone, not just the schools, but also our communities and community centers that are providing these services for kids, especially for kids kinder to fifth, because many of the schools are not offering after school, or they're limited on the spaces that they have.
Afuera recursos de tutoría o cualquier cosa que puedan ellos usar, y si estamos ya cortando,
So that will
ahorita en
affect
llamadas a esos niños de esa
those
edad
kids,
pequeña, ya
especially
que
the younger
muchos de
kids.
de más allá a veces ven que los niños de esa edad no necesitan la ayuda todavía, por eso se
Sometimes
enfocan en
they
los niños
think
más
that the
grandes, pero sí, los
young
niños
kids
pequeños
don't need that
necesitan esa
help and
ayuda
they
también,
focus on
porque si
older
no les
kids,
estamos ayudando
but
desde
they do
chiquito,
need
van a seguir
those
creciendo y no
need
van a mejorar
those
porque les estamos
services.
poniendo más trabajo encima y no están ellos enfocándose en la área que ellos necesitan más ayuda.
So thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Wendy, for your testimony.
ese testimonio.
Diana, do you
algo
want to
más
add
antes de
anything
que
else
vayamos
before we go to
al
the
segmento de
Q&A?
preguntas?
I think we're
No,
ready.
creo que estamos listas.
Okay, excellent.
Excelente,
Thank
muchas
you.
gracias. Pues
So
gracias
thank you
a
all
ustedes
for
cuatro
you for
por
your
estos
testimony
testimonios
and your
y por esa
presentation.
presentación
That is
muy
very
importante
important.
y muy
And it helps us
nos ayuda a
to
entender este
understand
proceso.
this process.
Tenemos
We have
número de
a number of
preguntas. Vamos a
questions,
empezar con, yo creo, la más
maybe
obvia.
the
Esta
obvious
se la vamos
one,
a hacer
and
a
we're going to ask
Yulisa.
this to you, Lisa.
¿A qué se debe
Why
este
do we have
déficit
this budget
presupuestario?
deficit?
¿Cuál es la
What is the
razón por la
reason
cual estamos
that we're confronting
enfrentando
this
este déficit?
enormous deficit?
Sí, sí, hablé un poco de esto
I'm
antes,
going
lo
to
voy a decir en inglés,
speak in
perdón,
English.
mi español para hablar así
My
técnico es
Spanish
un
is not
poco
that
más,
good for the technical.
no está muy bien. Entonces, just to recap, I talked a little bit about it when we were talking about that there's a variety of different factors as to why there is now a deficit. A couple of different things to look at. Income taxes, right? So that's based on people's incomes. So if less people are in the state, there's going to be less money. So as we look at that's why population trends are so critical to this factor. When people say like, oh, we've lost migration patterns out of California, like there's been less people moving into California and there's been more people moving out. So that has a big deal for us because we base our budget and the revenues that we get are income based, right? So that's one. The other thing is to look at another ways to look at is home sales, right? So a lot of money, also a portion of it, not a lot, a portion of money comes from that, right? There's different taxes that we all pay when we buy a home. So if less houses are being sold, for example, that services and goods, state taxes, right? So all sales taxes to look at. So if less sales are happening throughout the state, right? So we've seen people have been talking about inflation, right? For example, so people are buying less economic goods. There's also going to be less sales tax happening. And so all these factors come together to represent why there's less money coming to the state. So it's not just one, but it's like a variety of different factors. That makes sense?
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. And maybe just as a follow-up, part of this is not unique to California. Every state experienced this. Every state had quite a bit of federal COVID-related money in one way or another to help offset the economic cost of the pandemic, right? And whether it's housing or whether it was healthcare or whether it was childcare. In my home state of New Mexico, we used quite a bit of federal money to plug in childcare costs. And then once that money's gone, then all of a sudden states have to either cut services or figure out how to pay for them.
That's a really good point, Javier. I forgot to mention that. Yes, and some people have said that this is just the market regulating itself after, you know, COVID. We didn't have all these fundings, not just for, it wasn't just like, oh, we had more money for the COVID exams, right? There was all this funding that came from the federal government that paid for all these programming, whether it be, for example, if you might remember rent relief programming, a lot of that was federal COVID dollars that were helping families to stay on their feet during the fact that the pandemic had many people were losing their jobs. So there was money going towards, you know, providing that rent relief program, right? There was a variety of different things, food pantries, a lot of money was being poured into ensuring that people had food security, for example. You know, Project Room Key actually came out, I think, from the COVID, which was like paying for allowing for people who were unhoused to ensure that they had somewhere during the pandemic, because it was obviously critical to ensure that we were housing people in that effort, right? So all these federal funds were coming into the state. And now that that money is going away, it's going back to the original budgets that we had. But those problems and those programs, kind of people have really become accustomed to them and they really need them, right? It has shown. And so now it's that offset. What do we do with that money? How do we come up with that money that is missing now that we're not getting from the federal government? And on top of that, you look at the fact that I mentioned all this other things. So it's like a combination of things.
Yeah, no, excellent points, and it's a lesson, I think, for a lot of us, because I think, like I said earlier, California being the seventh largest economy in the world, you all are 3 or 4 years ahead of the rest of the country, sometimes for better or for worse, and in this case, certainly for worse. There's let me follow that up, and this question is for Yarisa. Esta pregunta es para Yarisa. Yarisa,
so Yarisa and Wendy, as moms, what is it that's causing more anxiety about this budget deficit? What's scaring you more about all of this?
Sí, yo
So
creo
I
que a
think that in
mí,
my
en
case,
mi caso, yo siento que a mí me está poniendo
I
como un poco
feel
ansiosa
like I'm
porque mis
getting
niños pues
anxious
van a una
because
escuela
my kids are
donde no tienen
attending
una
schools where
clase
they don't have
especial que le llaman ellos en las escuelas
a
públicas.
special class.
Ellos van
They
a
go to a
una
public charter,
Entonces
so
ellos están
they
en el programa
are
donde todos están en inclusion.
in an
Ellos tienen que
inclusion
tener un
class. They
one-on-one
need to have a
porque
one-on-one
pues a veces
because
sus
sometimes they
comportamientos no son buenos,
they have
entonces para eso
challenging
está la persona que
behaviors,
los
so
redirige.
they need to have
Pero sí
a
cortarían un
one-on-one to
presupuesto
be
así
redirected.
y
But
también me
maybe they're
dirían, le
gonna
vamos a
cut that
recortar las
program,
horas.
and also maybe they're gonna cut the
Eso
hours,
sería
so
como
it's
algo que
something that's
no
not gonna
funcionaría
work
para
for
mis
my kids
hijos porque si de por sí teniendo a
even
su one-on-one
even with
batallan
having a
mucho para poder
one-on-one, they are
concentrarse en la
struggling
clase.
to focus
Si
on
ellos no
class. If they
tuvieran
don't
una ayuda
have
como esa,
that type of support in class, I don't
no sé
know
cómo le harían, o sea,
what
no sé
can we
cómo le
do.
haríamos.
They
No podrían
wouldn't be
estar
able
ellos
to
en una
be
clase
in a
así.
regular classroom.
Y a este punto
And
cambiarlos de
right
escuela
now,
tampoco sería otra
moving them to
opción,
another school
porque
is
si los recortan en una
that's not
escuela,
an
pues lo
option either,
recortan en
because
todas, no
they're gonna be
solamente
cuts
en
all
una.
across, not
Y
just
si
in
hay
one
una
school.
clase, por
And let's
ejemplo, la
say in
clase
this
de
class, the
educación
education,
especial,
special
si
education,
digamos
if
tienen
they have
dos o
2,
tres
3
personas
assistants
con no
with
sé
maybe
cuántos,
10
10
kids
niños,
in
pongámosle,
that classroom. Imagine if they
imagínate,
cut
recortan
that
eso y
and
solo
there
le
are only
dan
1,
una o
2
dos personas para
assistants for
todos
all
esos
10
niños, va a
kids.
ser
It's going to be very difficult
muy
for
difícil
them,
para las
for the
personas que
people
están
that are
trabajando
working with
con
them, and
ellos y
also
para
for
los
kids
niños
because
también,
they'll
porque se
get
estresarían
stressed.
más.
So I
Entonces yo creo que esa
think
sería una de
that
las primeras
maybe that's
causas que a mí
one
me
of the
ponen como nerviosa.
first things that
Y la
are getting
segunda,
me
pues,
nervous.
es
And
la
also
universidad
the
de mis
university.
hijos. O sea,
One of my
una de
daughters is
mis hijas ya está en la
already in
universidad, la otra
college.
va
The
a ir
other
a la
one is
universidad en 2
about to
años. Entonces,
enter
si
the college
recortan
system
eso,
in 2
estoy
years.
pensando a futuro,
So I'm thinking
¿cómo va a
about the
ser
future.
poder
How
mandar
are
yo
we
a
going to be
mi hija
able
a
to
la
afford
universidad
to
si ya
send
no
my
están
daughter
los
to the
recursos que antes
university
teníamos
if there's going to
por
be all these
todos los
budget
recortes que
cuts and
van a
all these
hacer?
cuts on additional supports?
Claro, no, eso es un muy
Thank you
buenos
for
puntos. Gracias
sharing.
por
Very
compartir.
good points. And
Wendy, le damos
Wendy,
la
we will
oportunidad
also
también a
want to
usted,
give you the
qué es lo que más
opportunity
le causa
what's
este problema
producing more
presupuestario.
anxiety.
Sí,
So
gracias por
thank
esa
you for this
pregunta. Yo
question.
todavía no
I'm
soy
not
madre,
a
pero
mom
cuando
yet,
sea en el futuro,
but in
eso es
the
algo que
future, I'm
también estoy
also
pensando así
thinking
como
about
decía
this
ahorita
for
en
the
el futuro.
future.
Ya si lo están haciendo ahora y ya cuando yo empiezo a tener mis hijos
Once
y
I
ya
have my
tengo mi
kids,
hogar,
I have my
eso es algo
household,
que
I'm
también me
sure
va a
I'm
afectar
gonna
más
be
adelante. No ahorita,
affected
pero
by
más adelante
all
me
of these
afectaría cuando
cuts
ya
too if
estén
there's not
empezando las escuelas.
these types
Si
of
ya
programs
están
at
recortando
schools.
ahorita, ya más adelante van a cortar
So
más. Entonces
this
eso es
is
algo que
something that we need
tenemos
to
que
fix
arreglar
now,
ahorita o
or,
ver cómo
or
podemos
understand
arreglar
how we
en el
can
futuro
advocate
cuando
or how we
tengamos
can help
más
to fix it so
personas que
that in the
vengan
future
haciendo
it's
más
not an issue.
adelante, no les afectaría ni se estresen porque ya vamos a estar bien seguros con estas escuelas, con la universidad y no nos cobren mucho, pero
But
sí yo viendo
as I
a las
see the
familias que nosotros
families that we
estamos arreglando
serve
aquí, yo veo
here,
esto día a
I
día,
see
yo veo
how
cómo
this
les
is
está
getting
afectando
affected,
las preguntas que hacen,
and I
cómo yo puedo
and I try
ahogar en
to
mi
ask them
escuela para
how
que
we can
mis niños tengan
advocate
los mismos recursos que tenemos ahora. Entonces, yo viendo en esto, pues yo estoy viendo todos los miedos que tienen los padres, que también yo estoy involucrada para ver cómo
and
podemos
also I
ayudarles
want to
a
see
cómo
how we
ayudarles
can
a
advocate
abogar
and how we can
para el futuro de
advocate to
sus
help
hijos.
them.
Gracias, Wendy.
Thank you,
Y bueno,
Wendy.
esta es
And that's a
una buena avenida para la
good
última
lead
pregunta
to the
antes
last
de que se nos
question
acabe el
before
tiempo
we
hoy.
are running out of time. And
Y
this
esta
question
pregunta se la
will
vamos a
be
hacer a
to
Diana.
Diana.
Diana, usted
You,
como
as a community
organizadora
organizer and as a
comunitaria y como
community
líder
leader,
comunitaria,
we have heard from you,
escuchamos de
Lisa,
tu Lisa, ¿verdad?
about
Qué importante
how
es que nos
important it is to
organicemos y
get
que
organized
nos
and to
unamos con
meet
nuestros
with our
juntas
school
directivas de
boards,
las escuelas,
with
con nuestros
representatives
representantes
at state
estatales.
and local level,
¿Cómo
how
podemos
we
hacerle como
as
organizaciones sin
organizations,
fines de
a
lucro, organizaciones
community-based
comunitarias,
organization, how can
para
we
activar a
activate
nuestra
our
comunidad
communities
para que
so
esas
that
juntas,
in
esas
those
reuniones se
meetings
lleven a cabo
get
durante estos
happen
próximos
in the next
4,
4,
5,
6
6
weeks that
semanas?
are critical?
Sí, es
Really good
una buena
question.
pregunta. Yo
I
creo
think
que algo que
something that I want to
quiero
say
decir también es que
is
muchas de
that
las
many of
familias que
the
nosotros
families that we serve
proveemos servicios
and
son las
families
familias que
that were
fueron muy
highly
impactadas
impacted
por
by
COVID y hay
COVID, and
que
we need to recognize
reconocer
that
eso, que muchas de estas
that
familias no
many of
tenían
these
los
families
mismos beneficios, los
didn't get
mismos
the benefits
educación que tenían
or
como
the
las otras
education
personas
that
cuando
other people
estábamos
have.
pasando por la pandemia. Teniendo organizaciones como CCMP que son confiadas en la comunidad, ellos pueden venir a esta organización o a estas clases que nosotros ofrecemos
So
como
some
Abriendo
of
Puertas
them
para
are
aprender
coming
cómo
to
ellos
these
pueden
classes of Abriendo
seguir
Puertas so
siendo
they can
como
understand
advocates
how
para
they
su
can
comunidad, para
advocate
que
for
ellos
the
también pueden
community, so
venir
they can
juntos
also
y hablar
talk
con otras
to
personas. Muchas de estas personas a
their
veces
local
piensan que lo que está
representatives and let
pasando
them know what's
es algo
happening.
solo que les está pasando a ellos y eso no es
Uh,
verdad. Si ellos se juntaran y
so
empezaran a
if
hablar
they were
de los
able to sit
diferentes
down and talk about
como
the different
problemas o cómo ellos
issues
pueden
and also
encontrar
how to
soluciones para
solve,
los
how to
niños,
find
para sus
solutions.
familias, pueden, una voz es más
And we
grande
know
que
that
miles de
there's a
personas
power
que
in the
solo una voz.
numbers, and so
Estas
many voices will
organizaciones
be
como
stronger.
CCMP
So
que hay
organizations
aquí
like
o como
TMP and
diferentes
other organizations,
organizaciones les
we need
apoya
to
a nuestros
support
padres,
our
a nuestros
parents and our
clientes, que ellos
community
usen su
residents
voz, que ellos
to raise their
escriben
voice and to
cartas y que
write
no tengan
letters
miedo
and not
en
to be
que ellos lo que están
afraid
haciendo no
because
es
they're
algo
doing
que les va,
something that is,
no es public charges, lo que quiero decir, no
so
es
it's
algo que
not
les
a
pueden
public
impactar
charge.
porque ellos
Many
están
of them are
abogando
afraid of that.
por sus hijos y por
They're
sus
just
familias.
advocating for their kids.
Como un padre que tiene un sueño, pueden venir como a nosotros, como a
And so
CCMP o
parents
otras
can come
organizaciones, y
to
nosotros aquí les
TMP and
vamos
other
a apoyar para
organizations,
que ellos también pueden
and we
entender
can
cómo ellos
explain to
pueden
them how
ir a los
they can
diferentes
attend to these different
escuelas o
schools and meetings
reuniones de padres
to
para
be able
poder
to talk about
hablar
this.
sobre estos diferentes problemas.
Bueno, gracias, Diana. Con eso, compañeros, compañeras, se nos ha
So
terminado el
with that,
tiempo.
our time
Pero sí
is
quiero
up, but I want to
recordarles,
remind you that we
taller
have
ha sido
recording this
grabado
webinar
y
and
lo
we're
vamos a
going to be
compartir con
sharing
todos
it with all
ustedes,
of
con todas
you
sus
and
organizaciones
organizations.
en los
Between
próximos,
today and
entre hoy y
tomorrow,
mañana.
the recording will be
Vamos a
available.
mandarlo a través de
We'll
todas
be
nuestras redes
posting it
sociales
on
y
our
nuestras
social
listas de
media
correo
and also through our
electrónico para
listserv
que
so
compartan
that
esta
you can share
información
this information
con
with
sus
your
comunidades,
communities
que compartan esta
and
información con sus
with
miembros,
your
familias,
organization members and your
para
neighborhoods
activarlos en
so
lo
that
que
we
queda
can
de estas
empower
próximas semanas.
ourselves and advocate in the next weeks
Mi
that are
compañera
so
Josefina de Abriendo Puertas va
important.
a
My
compartir en el chat
colleague Josefina will be
links a nuestra
sharing
página de
links
acción
to
directa.
our page
Es
that's
una
called
página donde ustedes pueden
Direct
añadir su
Action.
nombre
You
a
can
una
add your
petición
name
que
to a
vamos a mandar
petition that we're
a
going to be
la
sending to
Asamblea
the
y al
Senate
Senado
and the
de California
legislation in California
para que
so that they
protejan
can
esos
protect
programas
these
esenciales.
essential services that
Entendemos
we understand as
como padres y
parents
madres de familia,
that
entendemos
the
que el
budget
presupuesto
needs to
pues
be
se tiene que
balanced.
balancear,
Uh,
¿verdad? Sin duda
and as
alguna. Y
Julissa
como nos
explained to
explicó
us,
Julissa, muchos de estos
many of those
factores pues están
factors
fuera del
are out
alcance
of
de
our
cualquiera de
reach
nosotros,
and out
incluyendo
of
de
the
los
reach of
líderes
our
políticos.
leaders. And the budget
El
needs to be
presupuesto se tiene que
balanced, but
balancear,
what we
pero lo que sí
demand and what we
exigimos y
expect for
esperamos de
them
nuestros líderes
is
es que
that
no se balanceen
it
solo
won't get
en este
balanced on our
escalado,
backs,
que se
but that it
balancee de
will
una
be
manera
balanced
balanceada,
by
por decirlo así, ¿no?
by
Así es que
cutting
una de
across
sus
and not
voces
only to the services that are so
hacer
essential for
clic en
us,
estos
our
formularios
communities.
y
So please
compartan
share these
estos
links
links con
with
sus
your
comunidades,
communities,
con
with
sus
your
miembros, para que,
uh,
como dije,
organization
para
members
añadir
so
sus
that you can
voces
add your voice to this
a
process.
este proceso.
Also, I would
También
like to invite
quisiera
you
invitarlos
to
a un número de
other
talleres
workshops
que
that we're going to
siguen
be having,
y voy
webinars,
a
and I'm going to share
compartir
my screen.
mi, este, mi pantalla.
I think you can
Creo
see
que
it
ya la
now.
pueden ver. Bueno, este es el
So
primer
this
taller
is the
que
first
hacemos esta
budget,
temporada
the
y
first
pues
webinar,
tras
sorry,
el
on
proceso
April 2nd about the
presupuestario
California
californiano.
State Budget
Para nuestros
Primer.
amigos en Nuevo México vamos a
And
tener
in New
un
Mexico,
taller
we're going to have
similar
a
el 16
similar
de abril.
webinar on
Ya
April
los que no sean de Nuevo
16.
México los invitamos
We
a
hope that
que
you
se
can
unan
join
a
us,
este
and our
taller
colleagues from
porque pues
California can
entre más
also join
sepamos
us.
mejor, ¿verdad? El saber es poder, como dice el dicho.
And then we're going to
Que vamos a seguir
follow
el día
on May
7 de mayo
7th
con un
with the
taller
Whole
con un grupo
Learner
nacional
Act.
America Forward,
We're
con el cual estamos
collaborating with a
colaborando
group
en
in a
un proyecto de ley
proposal
llamado en
called the
inglés
Whole Learner
The Whole
Act.
Learner Act, el acto del aprendizaje total que va a ser presentado en el
And it's going to
Congreso
be
en Washington
presented
y
in
pues vamos,
Washington, and we hope that
esperamos
all
que
of
todos
you would
ustedes se
join
unan
us in
a lo
what's
que va a
going to
ser
be a
un
year of
año de abogacía a
advocacy
través
at
del
the
gobierno
federal
federal a
level in
favor de
favor
este
of
proyecto de
this
ley y
proposal.
lo
And
vamos
then
a
we're going to
terminar el
end
día
on May
21 de mayo
21st
con
with a webinar
un taller
about
acerca
the
del llamado
baby
Baby Bonds,
bonds, which
que
is a
es un proyecto
proposal
de
in
ley en
different
diferentes
states
estados que se
that is
está
expanding,
expandiendo,
that
que propone
proposes
que a cada
that
uno de nuestros recién
each
nacidos
of our
el
newborns, the
gobierno ayude a
government
invertir en
will
un fondo
help
ahorrativo para estos
with
niños,
a
para que cuando esos
savings
niños
account
tengan
so that
18,
these kids,
19
when
años,
they're
puedan
18 years,
juntar
they can have like
40,
at
mil
least
dólares para abrir un
$40,000 to
negocio,
maybe
comprar su
buy their
primera
first
casa
house, open a
o pagar
business,
sus
or
estudios
maybe going to
universitarios.
college.
Este va a ser
That's going
el
to be on May
próximo mes y medio
21st,
de
and
talleres
we're
y
going to
pues
be
los vamos a
inviting you
estar invitando a
all.
todos.
All of
Todos
these
estos talleres empiezan a las
webinars
10 de
will
la
start
mañana
at
hora
10 a.m.
Pacífico,
Pacific time,
11 de la
11
mañana
a.m.
horario de
Mountain
montaña.
time.
Y
And we
pues
hope that
esperamos
you
que
are
se
able
unan a
to
todo
join
este
us
trabajo que vamos a
in
estar
all
haciendo
of them.
durante los próximos 6 semanas.
So with that,
Bueno, con
we're
eso
going to leave
los
you.
dejamos.
Thank you, everyone,
Gracias a
for
todos
joining
ustedes
us.
por su atención.
Thank you to our
Gracias a nuestros
panelists,
panelistas,
Julissa Gomez,
Julissa Gómez, vicepresidenta
VP
de
of
State Level
State Level
Strategies,
Strategies,
por
for
enseñarnos
teaching
acerca
us
del proceso
about the
presupuestario
state
en California.
process, the state budget
Gracias
process. And
a
thank you
las madres
to
de
the
familia
moms that
que nos
join us,
acompañaron hoy, a Yarisa
Yarisa
Flores de
Flores
la
from
Academia
Camino Nuevo,
Camino Nuevo,
Diana
y a
Alfaro,
Diana Alfaro, directora
Associate
ejecutiva
Executive
asociada
Director
de
from
Central City Neighborhood
TMP, and
Partners
the
y a la
navigator,
navegadora de
Wendy
Central
Chavez.
City Neighborhood Partners, Wendy
Thank
Chávez.
you.
Muy amables,
Thank you
gracias
for
por su
joining
atención
us,
y
and
estamos
we'll
en
be in
contacto.
touch.